you start realizing it's almost like if you were living solely on a diet of fast food or processed food. You might be able to do it for a little while, but one day you're like, yikes, this doesn't feel good. And that emptiness and that hollowness can then actually also be followed by symptoms of depression and anxiety. So here's the question. Can I make a relationship with a narcissistic person work? It's a question everybody wants an answer to. Let's get to that today. You got to drop your answer to that in the comments, okay? So can you make a relationship with a narcissistic person work? My answer to that is, it depends on what you mean by work. Many people ask me this question, so let's just break down what your options are. Out in the world there are relationships that are healthy, characterized by respect, kindness, compassion, growth, self-awareness, regulation, equitability. That's what everyone should be striving for because it's healthiest for us. There are relationships that are volatile, characterized by conflict, verbal aggression and abuse, perhaps other forms of abuse, impulsivity, dysregulation, criticism, contempt. This is what nobody should be striving for. There are relationships that we can call them inert. The trains run on time. There isn't that much connection or joy, but nobody is really yelling. It's sort of structured indifference. Maybe there's some sort of, feels like obligatory sex at times or hand-holding or whatever, maybe a few pleasant moments. But largely, there isn't a lot of there anymore. But there really isn't much conflict or emotion. I don't think this is healthy, but I do know that more than a few people find themselves in this. There are relationships that are imbalanced. One person's needs are met, the other person's needs are not met. And this really only works when one person just capitulates or gives in to the needs of the other person, a sort of relational handmaid's tale. You may be wondering why the hell this would happen. Well, these may be relationships characterized by tremendous dependency, fear of conflict, cultural beliefs around duty and obligation. These may be relationships that also have with them an underlying sense of menace, where one person knows that they cannot step out of line, so they quietly acquiesce. These are also absolutely not healthy. Now, so we can sort of think of this as sort of a door number 1, door number 2, door number 3, and we're adding a door number 4. In a narcissistic relationship, remember, door number 1 is a healthy relationship. In a narcissistic relationship, you're only going to get doors number 2, 3, or 4. Door number 1, like I said, is not an option. There is no version of this that'll look empathic, respectful, equitable, kind, compassionate, joyful, and regulated. So let's just shut that door down. Door number 2 is bad. It's always bad. Volatile and high conflict is always bad. So that outcome is not an example of a narcissistic relationship working. It's a bad, dangerous relationship, so let's just get rid of that. So that leaves doors number 3 and 4. And when people ask me, can I make a relationship work with a narcissistic person? My answer is, I guess so, if you're okay with either door number 3 or door number 4. Let's revisit option number 3, that idea of structured indifference. It's obviously not soul-filling or growth-oriented, but it's also not as abusive. Now, how can you make that kind of structured indifferent kind of happen with a narcissistic person? Expect very little and have a lot of radical acceptance. These relationships are what they are. Some good days, lots of bad days, unpredictability. Your needs won't typically be honored and may even be shamed. There will be manipulation, there will be gaslighting, lots of not going deep, and then an attempt to find joy, meaning, purpose, and fulfillment outside of the relationship, your children or work, friends, volunteering and community involvement, hobbies. Yeah, there may even every so often be some warmth in your relationship, but it won't be consistent. And it will feel relatively impoverished compared to what you see in other relationships. If you can find this structured indifference to be a suitable outcome, and trust me when I tell you a lot of people remain in this space, then you may be able to make it work. You may wonder, why would someone settle for this? Lots of reasons. And I don't think that they're sort of reasons they should be judged for. Some people might feel committed to keeping children in a single consistent space, financial issues, religious or cultural or social reasons. Now, what doesn't work is staying in the structured, indifferent situation with hope, because it's not going to change. And also, what is not going to work is if you are staying for children, continuing having the same arguments and continually sharing your discontent. It's not going to change, and it's not good for your kids to be in that kind of environment where people are always fighting. It's definitely not optimal for children to also grow up with that indifference, but it beats volatility any day. So if you can do the whole radical acceptance and realistic expectations thing and disengage, that's one version of it working. Option 4 is a bit yikes, but it involves you sort of simply giving in to the things they want completely. You may wonder, what's the difference between door number 3 and door number 4? Well, in number 3, you aren't giving in. You're just expecting little, and you aren't surprised when they're being entitled or egocentric or unempathic or manipulative. It's a resigned shrug, but you're not fawning over them or trying to sort of admire them. Option 4 is a bit more of playing the narcissistic person's ground game, giving them supply, making them look good, always giving in to what they want, even if it doesn't work for you, being sort of the trope of the devoted and sacrificial spouse. Now, in the vast majority of binary hetero-gendered stereotypes, this is the obedient and abnegated and self-sacrificed wife. However, I have seen cases where this was a husband. Now, this may be cultural, the time-worn idea that a spouse, especially a wife, should be self-sacrificing. Literally, I have grown up in such a culture where the prevailing belief was that a wife was being a good wife if she was in perpetual servitude to her husband, and that it was a privilege for her to do so. Please do not get me started. So if the wife conducts the role as the society expects, it's a complete giving in to that. And even still, when people give up everything for the narcissistic person, they still endure narcissistic abuse. But if a person wants to make that option work, then that would be the equivalent of making a narcissistic relationship work. Listen, any relationship, when you could give up on being seen or heard or recognized or your needs recognized, and you as a separate human being with separate experiences and perceptions, that's the only time a narcissistic relationship works. The challenge is that most people don't want this and may try to make the narcissistic relationship into something else, a place where they want to be seen or heard or valued. Obviously, very reasonable asks. It's just not happening in this kind of a relationship. Listen, I'm not trying to be paradoxical or contrarian. Like I told you, these are not good options. And you say, well, I'm not putting up with this. The fact is, though, lots of people can't leave these relationships. But trying to draw water from an empty well can break a person's spirit. I think that keeping it real, when people ask me, can it work? My answer is yes-ish, as long as you understand what works really means. I'm sorry to sort of burst your bubbles. I also recognize a lot of people can't go. But when you're able to be realistic with yourself about what you're in, it may not be the love story you want for yourself, but at least you can be honest with yourself and not live in a fiction that leaves you even more confused and self-blaming. Is it possible to have a successful long-distance relationship with a narcissist? Before I even get to that question, you should start answering it in the comments because it'll be real interesting to hear what you have to say. Before I get to answering that question, just a reminder, healing programs coming up. Hit that link in the video notes and please hit the notifications so you can get told every day when we have a new video coming out. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe because then you can learn the answer to these wonderful questions like, is it possible to have a successful long-distance relationship with a narcissist? Keep commenting, folks. Let's see what you have to say. And also in the comments, have any of you had a long-distance relationship with a narcissist? So let's go to the question. Can you have a successful long-distance relationship with a narcissist? I'm going, probably not. Certainly not a healthy one. In a world of being able to video chat, text, email, long-distance relationships have a different viability than perhaps they did even a couple of decades ago. But most people will tell you that a long-distance relationship isn't easy, technology or no technology. The lack of touch, intimacy, routine, sharing day-to-day experiences, just being there. Not having those things takes a toll on most people. Now again, I'd love to know how many of you are or have been in a long-distance relationship with a narcissist. Drop a note in the comments just so we can see and let us know how that worked out for you if you feel comfortable. But the fact is, when it comes to relationships, we meet who we meet. Sometimes you might meet someone when you're traveling, or someone who may be visiting your city for a little while, or somebody who moves off to school or gets transferred for work, and then voila, even if you didn't intend it, you find yourself in a long-distance relationship. It could be military, it could be any number of reasons. I don't think long-distance relationships are impossible. I think they require people who are independent, self-sufficient, people who are able to self-regulate and self-soothe, who are communicative, and long-distance relationships may not work as well when there are practical factors like raising children or other caregiving. I understand that. But they're not impossible. Ultimately, long-distance relationships do not flourish if either party in the relationship is insecure. You have to be comfortable with you and your partner and the situation and have trust. Lots and lots of trust. And since narcissistic relationships are all about insecurity and mistrust and suspiciousness and blame and projection, I think you're beginning to see why it's very unlikely why long-distance relationships with a narcissist would not work. Now, with a narcissistic person, it is probably impossible to have a long-distance relationship in any kind of healthy way. Above all else, narcissistic people are insecure and need admiration and validation. So if you are not there with them in person, they really are not getting that, right? Narcissistic relationships, even if you are in person, let alone long distance, are also plagued by trust issues, concerns with infidelity, the narcissistic person potentially needing to get validation from people who may be geographically closer or who they find on social media. Because projection is such a common defense in narcissism, the narcissist may often start accusing you of their shady behavior, which feels confusing and gaslighty. In addition, narcissistic people are often delusionally jealous, which can also make a long-distance relationship almost impossible. You will be accused of cheating, betrayal, inappropriate friendships, and you're not doing those things. Your social media will be stalked. Hell, even your devices may be monitored through malware or hacked passwords. It can get very controlling, and the amount of contact a narcissistic partner may ask you to engage in via video chatting, texting, DMing may potentially be very impractical and disruptive. But if you push back and say that you can't keep talking on video because you have to work or just do the stuff of life, you may get attacked and suspected for being shady. And time zone differences don't help. You saying that maybe you're sleeping at a logical bedtime for your time zone may be interpreted that you're doing something wrong, when in fact it's just bedtime. Now, it's interesting. Narcissistic relationships, especially in the love bombing phase, can often seem like that they have some long-distance potential. The love bombing and the excitement of a long-distance relationship in the early months can often play well with a narcissist initially. Lots of travel, showing up as a surprise, meeting on trips in other places, liaisons in hotels, phone sex. It's all very exciting. But at some point, the narcissistic person's attentional needs and validation needs and insecurity will become an issue, and you will find yourself either feeling as though your trust is being betrayed, or they will harangue you because they believe you're cheating. And a common gambit in long-distance narcissistic relationships, because they're so untrusting, is that they'll call you at bedtime by video so they can see that you are alone. And they'll do a lot of saying, you need to call me by whatever, video, FaceTime, whatever, instead, so I can see where you are. So again, that kind of stuff is common. Now, I have consulted on many cases of narcissistic abuse within the confines of a long-distance relationship. The non-narcissistic person would be doing everything in their power to either reassure the narcissist or appease the narcissist. And many people have said it was probably more exhausting and time-consuming to be in a long-distance relationship with a narcissistic person than being in the same city as them. For people who are being cheated on by the narcissist in a long-distance relationship, many of them blamed themselves for not being closer or being more available and believed that if they lived in the same city, that perhaps the narcissistic person would not cheat. No. The long distance just gives the narcissistic person more freedom and a better justification when they're caught, but cheater's going to cheat. The abandonment and attachment issues we observe in narcissism also doom the likelihood of success of a long-distance relationship. Now, there's a concept called rapprochement. It's something I've talked about on this channel before, but it's this thing called rapprochement. We observe it in relationships. I'm going to give you a very simplified version of this, but this concept basically talks about how people behave at the time of reunion, when they see someone again that they love. Now, healthy people with secure attachments at this rapprochement, at this reunion, are happy and they reconnect and they check in and they go from there. For people with anxious attachments, this time of reunion, this rapprochement, is very messy. There can be anger at the time of reunion, dysregulated emotion, just looking for a fight. Rapprochement crises in narcissistic relationships happen not just at the time of reunion, but also happen at the time of separation. And we tend to see abandonment anger in the day leading up to a departure. In most long-distance narcissistic relationships, there will be fights on the way home from the airport and on the way back to the airport. The attachment and abandonment issues take a difficult situation, a narcissistic long-distance relationship, and pretty much make it untenable. The heightened insecurity that a long-distance relationship with a narcissistic person can bring up does not bring out the best in either of you. You find that you are never present because you are either being bothered by the narcissistic person who keeps blowing up your phone because they don't trust you, or you may find yourself chronically wondering what they're doing, what they're up to, and why these long periods of silence. Now, this video is based on kind of a silly question, right? This idea of, does a long-distance relationship with a narcissist work? Because really the punchline to this is that no relationship with a narcissist works. Long-distance relationships raise a whole litany of other issues because of the distance and the disconnection, but ultimately, the core insecurity that plagues narcissistic people and ultimately the relationship, and the narcissistic person's need for supply, regulation, validation, and admiration, means that the video chats and phone sex are only going to be useful for only so long. Now, just like most narcissistic relationships, whether they are from 6 feet away or 6,000 miles away, the issues with empathy, intimacy, and all the rest of it means, distance or not, a healthy relationship is not in the cards. Some of you may be familiar with my book, Should I Stay or Should I Go? Surviving a Relationship with a Narcissist. That book was written from the perspective of, listen, it is so easy to tell a person who is in a narcissistic relationship to get up and go. But it's not always that simple. For reasons of finances, children, family, culture,
religion, you name it, people can't always leave. And people don't always want to leave. Sometimes they still are hoping for that fighting chance. But whatever their reasons, it's not my place to judge that decision. However, one thing that people need to be more realistically prepared for is, what does it mean to actually stay in the relationship? In the coming months, we're going to be having more and more series on sort of how to manage the narcissist in your life. And a lot of it has to do with things I repeat over and over again. Realistic expectations, radical acceptance, setting boundaries, not wasting time explaining and defending yourself, not getting so caught up in rescuing them and giving them second chances because of their own difficult history. The rules are the same every single time. When people really start absorbing what it is they need to do to endure a narcissistic relationship without getting destroyed by it, they find themselves no longer talking about important topics. That the worst thing that you can do if you're in a relationship with a narcissist is tell them something important is coming up. I can all but guarantee that if you tell them, I have a really important meeting today, or I have this incredibly important event to go to, they'll get into an argument with you that morning, kind of throwing off your mojo and your energy. Envy, jealousy, competition, all of those things can be driving it. But slowly but surely, you learn to really keep your narcissistic partner or family member, whoever it is, but typically partner, on a need-to-know basis. You stick with basic stuff like, wow, I can't believe it got cold so early this year, or, the sun is setting so much earlier now, or is it trash day? Is that an interesting relationship? I think most people would argue absolutely not. There's absolutely nothing interesting about that. But for reasons, for example, of wanting to be under the same roof as your kids all the time and not having joint custody, whatever it may be, you stay in this relationship where there's really no more connective tissue. How long can someone endure this? I have seen people do this for decades. I've seen people, once they realize this is what they're doing, when they really lived according to a plan of like, okay, I can only talk about the weather, we can talk about nothing meaningful, I can't engage with this person, etc. They leave within 6 months recognizing that, wow, like this is it. It really is this desolate. For people who go here, who actually stay in this sort of, for people who try to stay in a narcissistic relationship well beyond its shelf life, we do start seeing certain patterns. It may veer away from classical patterns we see in victims of narcissistic abuse. Anxiety, the depression, the self-doubt, the second guessing, the rumination, the confusion. That's all the classical stuff in narcissistic abuse, right? When it's happening and you're constantly getting invalidated. But once you start figuring it out and you are engaging less and less and less with the narcissist, and they're actually, quite frankly, getting quite bored with you, now you sort of feel like you're living with someone where both of you have a fair amount of contempt for each other. It feels incredibly uncomfortable. It's not at all satisfying. What happens then? Some people feel a sense of hollowness or emptiness. They're like, has it really just come to this? They may not feel that same sense of activation, confusion, and self-doubt and the being upside downness they felt in the acute phases of narcissistic abuse. But this sort of hollow, empty, I'm living with someone, but I'm not getting to experience the true depth and breadth of a human relationship, where we share with each other our lives, where we uplift each other, where we encourage each other, where I can talk about my dreams, where I can talk about my fears. You start realizing it's almost like if you were living solely on a diet of fast food or processed food. You might be able to do it for a little while, but one day you're like, yikes, this doesn't feel good. And that emptiness and that hollowness can then actually also be followed by symptoms of depression and anxiety and things like that. Some people, when they decide that they're going to stay in a narcissistic relationship, may also have feelings of shame. They feel like they can't talk about their choice because they feel anyone would say to them, come on, you need to get out, this isn't healthy for you. And they feel that they'll be judged if they share that their reasons for staying are financial or associated with children. Nobody's in a position to judge that. As somebody who's worked with many people who have left the narcissistic relationships and were left in financial ruin, or who left narcissistic relationships and it really created a difficult space for their kids to have to be with a narcissistic co-parent half the time, I absolutely understand why people would choose to stay. But not everyone does. And that sense of shame that can happen when you are actually now figured out, I'm going to stay in this and in this desolate space, can often lead people to become very isolated. They don't talk about this with other people. I mean, listen, it's not easy to say, I am in an absolutely loveless marriage or loveless relationship. There is no there, and I'm staying here for the most practical of reasons. I'm hoping that someday this will change, but right now it's not, and it's a really tough spot for me. It takes a lot to get there because people do struggle with feeling judged. And it's at this point, actually, where therapy can also be quite useful as a place for someone to say, you know what, it's okay, I get it. I understand why you're in this. And that sometimes some of the work is also around visualization, around what leaving could potentially look like. If you stay in a narcissistic relationship, you may not be the only one who's affected by this choice. If you have children who are watching you in this completely desolate, anemic relationship, it will take a toll on them. And what's so difficult is you're having to choose sort of what's the lesser of two evils. Do I leave and have them struggle with complicated custody and having to be with a difficult co-parent, or do I stay so at least I'm always there with them? But your poor child or children are now seeing two people who clearly not only do not love each other, but really may have frank contempt or dislike, or it's uncomfortable. The lack of connection, warm conversation, and a sense that you're all in it together will take a toll on your child. But like I said, the catch-22 here is they're being affected by this dynamic no matter what's happening. That does mean that things like considering therapy for your children at a younger age so they can actually have someone to talk to, whether that's in elementary school, middle school, high school, to talk about their feelings about this so they can get it out. Because it may not be an easy conversation to have. Hey, I'm staying in a really broken relationship for practical reasons. May not exactly be the lesson on love, life, and relationships a person wants to impart to their child. And this may also have an impact on the kinds of relationship choices they make down the road, which is why therapy becomes an important space for them to talk about some of this. In some cases, and other videos we talk about sort of like gray rocking and the impacts of gray rocking, we will see that the narcissistic individual, when they're no longer getting any supply, when they're no longer getting the joy and the fun of arguing with you or insulting you, or seeing that their insults are not hurting you anymore, they may get bored, and they may be the one who gets up and leaves. That may not always be easy either, because exactly the thing you were trying to avoid, whether it's joint custody, whether it's financial problems, whether it's the criticism from your community or family or whomever, you might be having to face that. And now you might feel like, are you kidding me? I put up with all this for this person to get up and leave? At the end of the day, if somebody said to me, is it healthier to be with or not with the narcissist? I'm always going to say not with, because it's a very unhealthy space to be in, to be with someone who invalidates you, insults you, doesn't show you empathy, doesn't offer healthy mirroring. That is an unhealthy space any day of the week. But the recognition that not everyone can do it means that people have to stay. If you stay, and this point was made in Should I Stay or Should I Go, it's not going to be easy on you, and it likely will take a toll on your health. For some people, the magic moment is when their kids are adults and out of the house. For some people, that's not the case. In fact, Los Angeles presents a unique paradox, because in Los Angeles, real estate suddenly became so expensive that people may have been living in a house that was once affordable and now is so expensive that in the case of a divorce, no one can buy the other one out and no one can afford to go find new housing. So you got two people kind of clanking around a house waiting for something to happen. I'm not sure what. But they really can't even afford to make the kinds of changes that are necessary. A final piece to keep in mind, though, as sort of shedding some light on this dark side, is what can I do? What if I am stuck and I'm not doing well? Things like therapy, support groups, cultivating healthy friendships where you do get to experience empathy and kindness and compassion and reciprocity, time with healthy family members, work or volunteer work that gives you meaning and purpose. And if you're called in a more spiritual direction, that you have daily practices or communities organized around your religion that might also give you that sense of meaning and purpose. These things may not erase the negative impact, the dark side, as it were, of being in a difficult relationship, but they may fortify you and give you more resilience in the face of it. Why do you think? What do you think is the most simple reason why a relationship with a narcissist really can't work? I'm here to give you that answer. So, any thoughts? The reason that a relationship with a narcissistic person can't work is because narcissistic people turn to relationships to seek out love for themselves, and people in narcissistic relationships love the narcissist. So, what does that mean? All the love is going one way, and that's to the narcissist. And that's why it can't work, because in terms of the love, it's narcissist 2, you 0. All the love goes to the narcissist because they're using the relationship simply to get love for themselves. But let's break this down. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Dr. Ramani. Welcome to this YouTube channel. And please, if you're new to this channel, hit that subscribe button. So let's break this down a little bit, because that's the simple reason. But and I know you must be thinking, really, Dr. Ramani, you've posted how many videos and we got this one? But I really want to break this down for its utter simplicity, sort of the basic truth here. Because so many of you are falling into these relationships, or you're still in these relationships, and you want to understand it. But I think it helps to understand that from the beginning, every narcissistic relationship is doomed. And that stands whether it's an intimate relationship or a parental relationship or even a friendship. Like I said, these relationships can't work because all narcissistic relationships are based on a faulty premise. You seek to love them and they seek love for themselves. That's the problem. They get all of the love, you get none of the love, and you're really confused. I got to thinking about this video because it came on the heels of a good friend asking me, hey, Ram, you know what? I'm thinking about my narcissistic recent ex. He told me he loves me, does he? And I thought, that's an interesting question because the simplicity of all of this hit me. For narcissistic people, love is about themselves. For when they say, I love you, it means I love you for me. I love what you do for me. I love you as an extension of me. Got it? For healthy people, love is about other people. I love you. I want to care for you. I respect you. I'm willing to make sacrifices and compromises for you. For healthy people, it's like love out. So if you're a healthy person in a relationship with a narcissist, the two of you are basically playing two different games. You're playing chess, they're playing checkers, same board, different pieces, different rules. It doesn't work. Narcissistic people get into relationships to regulate themselves. They have a problem with something called differentiation. They don't get that you, as their partner or their child or as their friend, you're a distinct person with distinct needs that are different from theirs. And that in an adult relationship, that means give and take. It's hard for them to understand that you may be having a different experience than them. So in essence, for a narcissistic person, you become an extension of them. And so loving you is really just loving themselves. When you ask them something which is not in line with what they need or want, well, that's not going to make sense. You're supposed to be an extension of them. So you asking for something or needing something or feeling something that's different than what they're feeling or needing is the equivalent of their hand out of their control slapping their face, again, and them not being able to control it. That doesn't make sense, right? Because it's an extension of them. Healthy people differentiate. I am me, you are you. If I'm hungry, you may not be hungry. If I am sad, you may not be sad. You may need something different than me, and I love you, so I can be present with that. And I can make shifts in me to be present with that and hear that difference. Healthy people don't get angry if someone wants something different or feels something different. I got to tell you, if I had $1 for every person who loves a narcissist and says, well, they tell me I love you, but they're so mean to me, that must mean they don't love you. That must mean they don't love me. Well, they do love you because you are an extension of them. Does that make sense? So when they say, I love you, they're really saying they love themselves in a dysfunctional way.
But when you started expressing your own needs and your own wants, well, then none of that computes for them. We see this happen with narcissistic parents all the time. In fact, a fair number of narcissistic parents are actually pretty good baby parents, right? Babies are so great. They're so cute. They're so huggy. They're so portable. And other than the crying and the diapers, if you give them what they want, by and large, you kind of own them, right? On top of that, they smile really easy. They might even look like their parent. You can dress them up however you want, and people love cooing at them. You get attention because you have a baby with you. So for a person who is looking for a relationship where the person is an extension of them, babies are a great accessory for them. And the baby, when it's a baby, experiences itself as an extension of the parent. And the narcissistic parent experiences the baby as an extension of themselves. So it all kind of works. Until one day, that baby becomes a toddler and then becomes a child and has language and starts expressing needs hardcore. And they say no. And they may be a little bit of a pain in the neck. And no, you can't dress them the way you want. And not so portable anymore, right? And a narcissistic person may experience their child as more inconvenient because now that child has needs and they may not align with the parents. In fact, the child is doing what they're supposed to do. They're individuating and becoming their own little separate person, while the narcissistic parent wants the child to remain an extension. If any of you had a narcissistic parent, you may even be able to remember the time when the shift happened from adoration to invalidation in your life. It was the day that you started having your own little ego and identity, which is what's supposed to happen with a kid. So when the narcissist says, I love you, they really are saying, I love me. And as long as you are a perfect mirror of them, validating, anticipating, smiling when they smile, feeling what they feel, cowering when they rage, having sex when they want, giving them space when they want, showing up when they want. Well, obviously, because you're just an extension of them, well, then the relationship works. But when you have your own needs, when you set a boundary, when you don't want to do what they do, and you have your own feelings or contradict them, well, then the relationship doesn't make sense to them, and it stops working. When you, as a healthy person, say, I love you to them, and you are compromising and listening, and you're there for them, even when it's not convenient for you, and you're validating them, and you wonder why they can't give it back. When you say, I love you, you love them, right? Not because they are an extension, but because you love them as a separate person outside of you. And this fundamental difference, loving the other versus loving the self, that's the problem. It really is that simple. And for this reason, narcissistic folks are not able to be adequate partners, friends, or parents. You may be able to make a horse race out of them being a boss or a colleague because that's not really love. But when you aren't their mirror, it will become abuse, and that's not sustainable either. What about therapy? Can that teach a narcissistic person love or how to love? Well, maybe. There are unicorns, years of therapy, differentiation, humility, mindfulness. You know the drill. This stuff is a long shot. But the idea of what loving another means, it's the sort of the Powerball of narcissistic change. I guess someone does win the lottery, but it's not as likely to happen on your watch. And as I said, lots and lots and lots and lots of therapy with a really, 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 really good therapist. That's a lot of lots and a lot of reallys. You can't checkmate in checkers. Remember that. And you can't be fully loved by someone who doesn't understand that you are separate from them. Recognizing that when they say I love you, they really are saying I love me, that's hard. But my hope is that knowing that helps people learn that they are indeed lovable. You're lovable. Just because someone can't love you, that doesn't make that otherwise. And this right there is the conundrum. When they say I love you, they're saying I kind of love me. When you say I love you, you're saying you love them. Like I said, 2-0. They're getting all the love, And if you're in one of these relationships, you're not getting any. Thanks again.